Finding Common Battlegrounds is an attempt by two brothers, one conservative, the other progressive, to have civil conversations about politics with a little help from their friends.
All right, everyone, welcome to another episode of Finding Common Battlegrounds. We're here today. We're going to be talking about media and media bias. Is there a mainstream media bias to the left? But first, let me introduce my debaters. We have Ryan and Josh Cragen, brothers, but polar opposites. Ryan is a flaming liberal, and Josh is a staunch conservative. Yeah. Yep. And so they'll be representing each side, but this is the podcast about finding common ground instead of arguing and in a barbarian manner. We're more sophisticated than that. We're going to try and get the other to agree with our points and our sides, and they get brownie points for every time they can get the other to agree with them. So again, today we're talking about the mainstream media bias, but I want to talk about our sponsor, Lux Bidets, and we have a winner from last week that I want to announce. We got an email from Perry Winterbottom. That doesn't sound like a real name, but that's sent us an email. So we'll be sending it out to the person who referred her, and that we'll be sending that out and getting them their brand new bidet. Yay!
Lux Bidet Neo 180.
There you go.
Yay.
All right. So let's talk about this bias in the media. So this has been an accusation of the right for many, many years. And many have said that Fox News is sort of a response to the mainstream media being so liberal in their coverage, and that Fox News is sort of the pendulum swinging over to counteract that all the other mainstream channels are biased toward the left. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, and get into it. So I'm just going to dive in here, and I'm going to start with one of Josh's questions to Ryan.
Ooh, can I jump in real quick?
Yeah.
I told you I'm going to be really. I apologize in advance to everybody, but before we start,
for his arguments,
I do. Before we start, I just want to make sure we're talking about the same media outlets. By mainstream, we mean, say, NBC, ABC, and CBS as major television networks. For cable, do we mean CNN? And for print media, do we mean like Newsweek, Associated Press, NPR, New York Times, LA Times, Washington Post? Are we calling them mainstream? Is that what we mean?
So I was sure this was going to come up as part of the questioning of like setting, because right, what does that mean, right? And what's included in that?
The only news that I'm even aware of is InfoWars. What are you guys talking about?
Yeah, it's the only thing Josh subscribes to.
I can't even remember that guy's Alex Jones. That's his name.
Oh my gosh,
that was a joke.
I know.
Thank
you.
A joke.
I'm so glad that's a joke. This podcast would not be possible if that was actually true.
So I mean, and that's sort of what this podcast is here to define, like what that means, right? What that accusation means when they say that. And I don't know if Josh agrees with
that
Ryan
would be my definition of mainstream media, is those major the news
major
sources,
networks,
the major networks that have been around for a long time, the major newspapers where we have historically gotten news. Yeah, I think we're on the same page.
Okay, and then just to contrast that, so if we've got the mainstream, which would be like NBC, ABC, CBS is like television networks, and the other, we'd also have to kind of delineate what non-mainstream or marginal news networks would be. Some, of course, to the left, some to the right. So to the right would be Fox News. Tom already mentioned Fox News. To the left, I think we could say would be MSNBC for cable news. The right, I think, owns talk radio, right? Like, I don't know of any left-leaning talk radio. So it's like Sean Hannity and Glenn Beck and a couple of others.
Despite the attempts with the fairness doctrine of the left to co-opt the space. Just nobody wanted to listen to any leftist blowhard.
Nobody does. So it doesn't work. For print media, the New Yorker, I think, is a bit to the left, but Mother Jones is definitely to the left. Breitbart is really far to the right. And I just have to mention this. One American News, I think, went to the far right, built a plank off the edge, then jumped off in it and are floating in idiot space. So I would say one American News. I don't know if you're familiar with
Somebody's
One American News.
Poisoning the well here before we even start.
Yeah.
They're way so far to the right that I don't even think they're in reality.
Okay, but you're poisoning the well with all of this.
Yes.
Well, but I'm trying to lay out, like, can we start from that foundational point? And I'm not trying to make this a point. Like, we just have to agree. Mainstream is the ones that I mentioned, and these are the ones that we can agree are like.
Is this going to count as one of your questions, Ryan?
Needs to. If it is, then I've got 5 this week.
Oh my God. Yeah, I noticed already.
I do have 4, but my 4th you'll like, Josh. So I don't know about the other 3. Can we agree though? Like, you already agreed what the mainstream is. Can we agree that there are then stuff to the left and right?
Yeah, obviously. I don't know if I would agree with all your classifications, but yes, obviously.
Okay. All right. Then go ahead.
Can I continue? Okay.
Yes. Sorry.
All right. Ryan, do you agree that a majority of Americans believe there is media bias? And if you do, how relevant could that be?
Okay. So all the polls, and it's getting more pronounced every year. And I'll go through a couple really fast because apparently I need to be fast today to make up for Ryan's thesis. I'll just blaze through some of the numbers. Rasmussen reports found voters overwhelmingly believe fake news is a problem, and a majority, 58%, agree with the former president that the media become the enemy of the people. 83% said it was a serious problem. Only 14% disagreed, and it's split along party lines. 92% of the Republicans agreed compared to 82% of independents and 74% of Democrats. Do I need to go into the polls? There's a bunch of polls that state that most people, the majority of people in America, believe that they can't trust the news like they could. Or
I've read those reports, but that's not
there's a ton of them.
Saying that they're liberal, but right.
Well, it's split along party lines. Obviously, Republicans, upwards of 70-80% are saying I don't trust any of the mainstream media, and Democrats are way more likely to say they do trust it. But still, even a lot of Democrats are saying that they don't trust the media. Or let me read this one. Nearly half, 46% of all Americans think the media is very biased. 57% say their own news sources are biased, which is alarming. And 69% are concerned about the bias in the news others are getting. 9%, driven largely by conservatives, say distrusted media are trying to ruin the country. So
yes, that is alarming, right? You're like, I know they're hitting the Kool-Aid, right?
Yeah.
Everyone's drinking the Kool-Aid, but I don't care. I like it.
That's part of the problem. I know that where I'm getting my news, it's slanted to the right, or I try to find stuff that's in the middle, and I know Ryan does too, but BBC, from some of the stuff I'll talk about in my third point, they're slanted to the left. Not too far to the left, but they're slanted to the left. So everybody basically in America thinks there's some sort of bias in the media. Is that relevant that the perception, at the very least, because it's hard to quantify, the perception of the majority of Americans believe there is bias in the media?
I mean, I certainly can't refute like poll numbers, right? So if the poll numbers are accurate, then they're accurate, and that is what it
all
is.
The polls are basically, right around the same. It depends on when the poll is taking place because it's actually getting more pronounced.
Yeah, but I don't think Trump helped this. And I want to just be clear about something.
I knew you were going there.
Well, but I want to be clear about something. Trump he trumpeted many times that media is the enemy of the people. And that is absolutely not true. I don't know that people realize that freedom of the press is part of the First Amendment in our Bill of Rights. Mm-hmm. And we absolutely want freedom of the press, right? It is dictators and autocrats who crack down on the press because the press shines the light on the awfulness that happens by dictators and autocrats. And I think
that's
why
what it's supposed to do.
That's what it's supposed to do. That's why we want freedom of the press. So I absolutely, like, when I hear someone like Trump say the media is the enemy of the people, I am terrified at the prospects for our country, because he's basically saying, oh no, one of the key things to keep our politicians honest and to keep our country free is something that he wants to crack down on and destroy. I mean, I get that there are problems. We're going to talk about problems, but that is terrible.
That's a mischaracterization. He's not saying he wants to destroy the press. We all want free press. We want unbiased. Okay, let me read this. I found this one last statistic. 48% of Americans do not trust any media source to deliver them unbiased news, according to a new poll. That number is up 10 percentage points from the end of 2020, according to Civic Science. So that's just this year. After Trump's been out of office, the number's still going up. Okay, people are, and he's not talking like he was. He's banned off Twitter. You're not hearing from Trump, and we're still going in that direction where people are less likely to trust the media. So you can't just blame this on Trump. Okay,
no. I'm not trying to say
trending in this direction for years, for a very long time.
I want to make one observation I'll make here, and I'll see if you agree, Ryan and Josh, with this, is that I feel like Trump very intentionally attacked the media, which made the media, I think, reacted and took his baiting and attacked him back, which then it said kind of ruined his credibility, or the media's credibility, right? Because because then he could just be like, oh, they're just biased. They're just attacking, right? They hate me and they're just going to, sorry about the dog. And I think that sort of ruined. I think maybe Trump was doing that on purpose, of just being like, look, they're out to get me, so they're fake, right? But they suck, and therefore, but they kind of, the media sort of reacted and went after him. I don't know. What do you think?
Again, I think it's accurate to describe Trump as a remarkable media troll. I mean, I think that's totally fair. He was really good at it. I don't like giving him credit for lots of things, but one of the things that he did really well is he trolled the media. He was good at getting them to take the bait and make themselves look stupid in the process, because really all he was doing was getting free press coverage. He had to spend very little money to get in front of the press, because everybody wanted to see the train wreck that was Donald Trump on a regular basis. And so the media stepped in and was like, let's cover the train wreck. And everybody got to see it. And it was all free press for him. And in his mind, I think it is, but
the media, when they were attacked, they all banded together. They circled the wagons. So they were even more biased, if that makes sense, because they were collectively they were being attacked. So they and I'll get into this, because this is something that's been happening for a long time as well, where I'm broaching into my third point.
Okay. Right. Yeah, maybe we'll. Sorry, I kind of just want to get your input on that, but all right, let's move on.
Well, did you answer? Is that important, Ryan? The perception of most people believe there's bias. Do you think that's important?
Right. So I think I said I can't disagree with polls. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that I do. So I'm not disagreeing with the polls. I think it's important for the conversation that we're having today to recognize that there is a perception of bias. I'm hoping that some of my points will start down the path of helping people realize that maybe the bias isn't as bad as people think it is.
Okay. Ding, ding, Josh.
Yeah.
Good job. Okay.
What a song, Tom.
All right. Josh, can we agree that mainstream media outlets are not overtly biased in their coverage of the news, but probably exhibit subtle biases in the news they chose to cover, just like all media outlets do?
Okay, so I've got a bigger point here, and this comes actually from a research project I've been working on, but there are two ways, at least two ways, but primarily two ways that a media outlet can exhibit bias. First, they can cover the news itself in a biased fashion, providing commentary on the news rather than simply reporting the news. I think this is what most people believe is happening when they claim there is significant media bias. They think that the news sections are reporting the news in a biased fashion. And I'm really skeptical that the mainstream media has a massive bias in this way, maybe a small one, but not a massive one. The second type of bias is in choosing what news you cover. I think it is much harder to be consciously aware of this bias. choosing to focus coverage on something terrible Joe Biden did instead of covering an uplifting story about firefighters saving a cat from a burning building necessarily requires decisions about what is important and what is not important. I get that that's a crappy example, but I think it illustrates the subtle way in which news coverage can be biased in story selection and the promotion of what is deemed important. And I think this type of bias is more common in all media outlets than we or the media outlets themselves realize. So just to recap quickly, there are two types of bias: bias in how you report the news and bias in what news gets reported. In my opinion, and I could totally be wrong on this, I genuinely think there is minimal bias of the first type among mainstream media and probably more of the second type. And I did actually pull some clips, 3 news clips that I pulled today. If you guys want to watch them, we can certainly do that. If you're just going to agree with the point, we can skip it. But basically, I pulled one from ABC, one from MSNBC, and one from Fox News on the infrastructure bills that are currently in the House and the Senate, right? And I thought it was fascinating to see how the news was reported by these 3 different media outlets. So we can show them, we can watch them if you want. They're like a minute each. And I did select like very specific pieces. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll watch these clips and see if I'm accurate on this. So sharing now, and I'll cut to this. All right. So let's do ABC first. Oh, hold on. You guys can't hear the audio, can you?
Just see Nancy Pelosi's ugly zombie face.
I know. Okay, so I'm going to share my sound and we'll go back. So this is ABC News. Here we go.
All eyes on Washington now, this high-stakes showdown. Congress averting that government shutdown. And now the question, of course, will the House vote tonight on the $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill already passed by the Senate? Money for roads, bridges, broadband, and to create jobs. Progressives have said they want a framework for the much larger human infrastructure bill, expanded health care, child care, and fighting climate change. But is it even possible a framework comes together by tonight? All day today, Speaker Pelosi vowing to press ahead with the vote, saying they're on a path to win the vote. A short time ago, we learned she is still working the phones, counting votes at this hour. And tonight, one of the key moderate Democratic senators, Joe Manchin, who they need on board for that larger bill, has confirmed a price tag he offered the White House some time ago that he would be comfortable with. The other moderate Senator, Kyrsten Sinema, saying she's been sharing her concerns on the larger plan. The head of the Progressive Caucus in the House, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, saying their number remains $3.5 trillion.
Okay, so that's ABC. Which one do you want next? MSNBC or Fox?
MSNBC.
All right, so here's MSNBC. This is a commentator on the Rachel Maddow show.
I actually had a similar thought, Rachel, a few hours ago. Why aren't Republican leaders providing some votes to pass this infrastructure bill? Because that would undercut the goal of House progressives if they do pass this tonight. The progressive position, their fear, as you point out, is that if the infrastructure bill passes, then centrist Democrats in the House and the Senate will bolt. They will say, we didn't commit to doing this other thing, or we would like to shrink it, cut it in half. Now, centrist Democrats insist that that is not what they're planning to do. Congressman Josh Gottheimer, who's been pushing for this vote, says he's absolutely committed to a reconciliation bill. And the progressives I talked to are less worried about the centrists in the House. They're more worried about centrist Democratic senators, 2 in particular, Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. Manchin came out with his plan for the first time today, his price tag publicly, at least $1.5 trillion, which is a far cry from the $3.5 trillion that the vast majority of Democrats want. Senator Sinema has not said what her number is. She's not given any number at all, and that opaqueness is only reaffirming the desire among progressives to hold up the infrastructure bill. Now, among Republicans, there is a group called the Problem Solvers Caucus in the House of Representatives that months ago endorsed this framework. But the Republican co-chair of that, Brian Fitzpatrick, told me a few hours ago that he's a yes on this bill, but he doesn't know where the other 27 Republicans in the group stand. So it's a strange situation where Republicans could undercut progressives. Instead, what they're doing is actually strengthening the hand of the Progressive Caucus by opposing this bill.
Exactly. If they could see beyond the partisan lens, or if they could even just see to the longer-term partisan advantage here rather than any short-term instincts, they could actually deal a real blow to the progressive cause here. But I feel like they're not wired to do that kind of to play that kind of checkers.
Okay. And Fox News. And you'll see that they're literally all talking about the exact same thing. How they're framing it is I think, quite different. Here's our last one.
Jesse, I want to play this soundbite from Joe Manchin today because it was almost like he was talking from another planet. And to a lot of people, I think it made a lot of sense. He's talking about who he is, who he's always been, and what he believes in as an American senator. Watch this.
I cannot accept our economy or basically our society moving towards an entitlement mentality that you're entitled. Okay? I'm more of a rewarding, because I can help those who really need help if those who can help themselves do so.
Senator's welcome to cross the aisle and come to the Republican Party any day he wants. I think that would be quite nice. So here's what happened. So Biden's unpopular and Bernie Sanders is crazy. So you have crazy and unpopular get together, and they're trying to nuke through a 50-50 Senate, the most expensive bill in American history. Joe Biden hasn't read it. Joe Biden didn't run on this. This thing's like this thick. I can't even pick this thing. Bongino could probably pick it up.
I got arthritis.
He has. I mean, even Dan Bongino can't curl
it's
this
all
thing.
show muscles, buddy.
Right? So if you look at what's in it, this is what? Billions for AOC's Green Army, billions to rig elections and to buy votes, billions of freebies, free babysitters, free lunches, freebies for illegals. It's like a wet market for welfare. It's got everything. So why are we here, Martha? Because Georgia voters didn't show up, and we handed the Democrats the Senate, right? That's why we're in this position. But the great people of West Virginia sent Joe Manchin to Washington, and Joe Manchin basically went up there with a sword and sliced this socialist monstrosity in half. He says, no, 1.5 trillion.
Which is still a heck of a lot of money.
Still wickedly expensive, but we're not going to give people free stuff if they don't actually need it. So now this is Joe versus Joe. Looks like Manchin's derailing this crazy train, thank God. They may get something passed, but it's not that type of money that we're talking about, 3.5. It's going to be less. And thank you, people of West Virginia. And as I said, Joe Manchin's welcome to cross the aisle at any time.
Okay, so those are the three clips. Again, I didn't spend a lot of time trying to find specific clips. I wanted clips that were all talking about the exact same topic from those three media sources. We would call ABC mainstream. Josh is yawning. He's like, this is so boring.
That was really boring, and it was way more than 3 minutes.
Well, it was like 5 minutes. Sorry. But I hope my point is kind of clear. If we look at ABC News, it was pretty straightforward. It's like, this is the news, sans commentary. Okay. Rachel Maddow was all commentary, plotting, the Republicans could do this so much better. They could absolutely hit Democrats, but these people aren't smart. And then Fox News was all about how, it's a socialist agenda. It's terrible. All of this is awful. The two not mainstream were just commentary. They were not news, but the mainstream was basically just the news. So this gets back to my first point. Can we agree that mainstream media outlets are not overtly biased in their coverage of the news, even if they're probably exhibiting subtle biases in the news they choose to cover, just like all media outlets do?
Absolutely not. That's one video. You took one video and that is not even remotely empirical. I don't even know what to say. You want to prove that point by showing me one video? No, I don't agree. I can't give you agreement there. They're not even close.
All right. That was interesting because the ABC video, it did seem fairly objective. I will say that they did talk about, he did say, and what's in it? It's roads and infrastructure and this and that. And if I was a watcher that just tuned in for the first time, I'd be like, oh, those are all good things, right?
Exactly. He didn't talk about any of the pork.
Well, or that it would be nice to be like 3.5 is the highest, we've ever spent. We've never gone over $1 trillion on a spending bill. And that, what is this other, 2.5 trillion, I think are are questions that are valid, or it would be because the 1 trillion bill has regular stuff in it, right? It has the same stuff in there. So what's the difference, right? That would be it would be nice to at least mention that, right? And they'd be like, oh, there's all the stuff and they just got to vote for it, right? So it does seem like, even though he did sound objective, I do think they're sort of painting. Okay. I do think it was biased, the ABC one.
Okay. Let me point something out here, because I love that Tom said that. And I was going to touch on this with my third argument. A part of the problem with this whole issue is it's so hard to quantify, because it's opinion, it's bias. Okay. Yeah. So Tom and I watched that ABC video, or CBS, or whoever it was, and we both see bias in it. He's just talking about the fluff. Ryan saw no bias in it. He thought that was straight down the middle. That's why this thing is so hard to quantify. That's why it's hard to prove. Ryan saw no bias in that one. And fair enough. Me watching the Fox News one, I'm more inclined to not see bias there, even though there was obviously bias there.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, and I think you're watching Fox News, you're going to get bias. Right?
Exactly. So again, it comes back to the confirmation bias, like we were talking about last time. It's this whole topic is hard to quantify, and I'll try to do it with my third argument. But no, that I don't agree with that.
I think we're going to have the same third argument. Our third arguments might be exactly the same. I mean, I could respond. I don't know that I necessarily want to.
No, let's just move on, and then you can wrap it into any of your follow-up arguments. Okay. Yeah. Ryan, would you agree there are obvious examples of the media covering for Biden and Democrats?
Okay, this actually goes to Ryan's second point, his 1.2 point or whatever. I've lost how many arguments he's made so far, where he talked about selectively covering the news as a form of bias. Okay. I'm going to run through these fast. If you have questions, or if you want resources, or source material, let me know. But let me start with this one. When we did our Afghanistan podcast, Ryan called bullcrap when I was talking about the Biden pulling out the Air Force contractors to help Afghanistan, because he hadn't heard anything about that, right? And then it turned out Ryan, being fair-minded, went in after calling bullcrap on me on air here.
Where did you have to dig for that, or was that presented to you in some?
I mean, there were some mainstream media sources that I did eventually find it on, but it wasn't like this was a headline. This was not.
He had to dig
massive front pages. It was, this was here, but yeah.
And I'm saying, Josh, where did you hear it? Like,
I think I found that one on Daily Wire, Ben Shapiro's site. Okay. And
so
again,
a conservative site,
a very conservative site, and I know that. But he reported that, and he also reported at the time that this was Biden's call. It was Biden's fault, and I brought that up several times in the Afghanistan podcast. And Ryan called bullcrap and said, "No, his generals were on board and all that crap." What did we just find out from General Milley and McKenzie? They told Biden to do the same thing I said: leave troops there. Biden didn't. Okay. The mainstream news didn't report on any of this, but Ben Shapiro reported on it immediately. Okay. So they're selectively not covering things. So let me just run through a bunch of things. The kids,
which is Ryan's second point, right?
Yeah.
His second example is that they're selective.
It's a different kind of bias. Yeah. So
but it's a very real
in how you report the news, and then there's bias in what news you report.
And
those are different.
I actually find this to be a bigger problem. Okay. The kids in cages thing. Ryan and I have talked about this. Obama started the program. He built the cages. Nobody reported on it in the mainstream media. The conservative media, the fringe media like Daily Wire, they reported on that when Biden when Obama built the cages. Then Trump continued the program, expanded it slightly, and what did the media do? Blew it up. Trump's throwing kids in cages. Now what's happening right now? Biden has expanded the cages because he created a crazy monstrosity of a problem down there. Is the media reporting on it?
Not as much, no.
Not,
I mean, it's
the
there, but
media,
it's
not at all. Okay?
I've seen it in the mainstream media. And
very small.
Yes.
Thank you for being objective. Very
but
small.
It's there.
Okay. This one's great. Biden's son, Hunter. Before the election, all conservatives knew that he was under investigation for federal money laundering. Okay. And we all knew about his crazy laptop things where he kept getting drunk, taking broken laptops to be fixed. And they had him doing drugs and sleeping with his cousin and talking about illegal deals. Everybody on the right knew that. The left refused to report on that. When we knew about that in May of 2020. When did the left finally report on any of that? 2021, a year later, after the election. Okay, we all knew about that.
I think conservatives were expecting that to be the October surprise, right? That was going to be their big boom, right?
And it should have been. Biden's son is under FBI investigation for federal money laundering, and Biden is involved. We have records of him being involved, and the media hid that. They did the same thing for Cuomo because he was the golden boy in 2020. We knew back in May 2020 that he was killing old folks by throwing COVID patients in old folks' homes. We knew that. We reported it. Well, I didn't, but the conservatives did. I actually did. I threw it on. I threw it on Facebook, and people called bullcrap because nobody reported it on the left until 2021 after the election. Nobody cared before. Nobody reported that the Cuomos were grabbing people's butts and that the one brother was killing people until after the election. Okay.
So Ryan, do you agree that the media is covering for Biden?
Is that the question?
Yes. There are obvious examples of the media Biden and Democrats.
You're telling me those aren't examples of the media covering?
No. But I just hate the question because can we just say like
makes you look bad?
No, that's not the point, right? The bigger point that you're trying to make, you're just getting jabs in, right? The bigger point you're trying to make is there are times when the media does not, it basically does what I said is the second type of bias. They're selective in picking what they're going to say is important for people to know.
And I can give you a whole bunch of these.
Sure, I already admitted that though. Like I said, this is probably more pervasive.
There is media bias. You're admitting.
Yes, but this is not the main question that we're getting at today, which is there bias in news reporting by the mainstream media? And my point is when they're reporting the news, yes, they are. Because again, this is why I did as my first point, separating out the two types of bias. Is there bias in how you report the news? And then is there bias in what news you report? I don't think the first one is nearly as bad as a lot of people suggest for the mainstream media. The second one because I do think is a problem. No, well, we're all biased, and I'll get to that in my third point. But the first one I don't think is as bad, and that's why I tried to show the video. They seem pretty objective. They're covering the news. And in my second point, I'm going to illustrate this again. They're basically just describing what happened. What they pick to cover, which is your point, I think can be very biased. And then in my fourth point, I'm going to kind of throw this all to the wind. But
so you're okay. So
I don't know what he just said because he.
What do you? No, I get. I
said don't make it about Biden. Make it about the media.
But
and then I'll agree with you.
I did.
Are there examples of the media cover? Are they covering for Biden? Like, are you agreeing that there are? And if you say yes, because I mean, we think we all know there are, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're biased, right?
Right, because they cover for all sorts of things. They do this for everybody. It's not like Trump never had anything covered up by the media, or Bush never had anything covered up for the media, or Reagan never had anything covered up by the media. Every media outlet is going to cover
talking about
right.
The war in Iraq. The media totally missed that one. Totally missed that and misreported that. We all thought there were weapons of mass destruction.
For him, or were they just wrong? Because those are two very different things. I thought there were weapons of mass destruction because everybody was reporting that. So
but the media didn't do their job and actually investigate.
Okay, that's totally
I know you're
different.
you're parsing something out and saying the media were wrong versus the media are willfully saying
that's a huge difference. That's a huge difference. How can you say that's not a big difference?
What if you don't know the difference? What if you're? I get what you're saying. You're like, no.
Is very important in the law.
I get that. I get what you're saying. You're saying they're willfully doing this. Yes. Sometimes they're not willfully doing it.
I just gave you several examples of where they were because the factor was the election. They were covering this stuff. They were refusing to report on it.
See, but now you're saying like the election. Now you're saying you know their intent, and I don't think you can say you know their intent.
Yeah.
Right.
I
get that you can.
It's pretty obvious.
You can infer
when we knew
what you think, or you can impute intent.
Holy crap! You are,
but you don't know. I'm not squirming
to make.
I already admitted
for them.
I conceded the point, Josh. I conceded the point. I just conceded. I just think you're going
happy, Josh. Okay.
I'm happy. I'm so
All right,
happy.
Josh, we're moving on to your question from Ryan here. Josh, can we agree that the mainstream media exhibits minimal explicit bias in the news reporting, even if there tends to be a slight left-leaning bias in the columns, opinions, and editorials? So I think this is getting back to what you were just stating, Ryan.
I'm trying to get at this point. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm always bothered by claims that the media are biased, even though in my fourth point, I will admit that I think there is some bias, even though I don't think it's as bad as people think. Here's why. For many media outlets, particularly mainstream media outlets, there is a heavy emphasis on straight reporting of what they deem to be newsworthy. Remember my two different types of bias. I pulled the following from a top story on the homepage of the Tampa Bay Times today, which is my mainstream local newspaper, right? Here's the headline: 5 indicted in shooting death of 4-year-old Tampa girl. First 2 paragraphs, I'm not going to read the whole thing. A grand jury has indicted 5 people in the August 22nd slaying of Suni Bell, a 4-year-old Tampa girl shot to death from another car as she was riding east on Hillsborough Avenue. All 5 of the suspects have been taken into custody by the U.S. Marshals Florida Regional Fugitive Task Force, Tampa police said in a news release. This isn't my primary point, but can we agree that there isn't notable explicit bias in what is being reported here?
Agreed.
Right?
Okay.
Sure. Perhaps there's subtle bias in that the Tampa Bay Times chose to make this a top news story, even though it's kind of a big deal that a 4-year-old girl was shot in a car just randomly, which is awful. Or in how they are depicting.
They say if it bleeds, it leads.
Yes, right.
So
they also are depicting the death as tragic, but I think the death is tragic. But there isn't a left or right slant in the reporting of the news here. Okay, it's straight news. It's just, here's what happened.
Yeah.
And this is the part that really bugs me, is people conflate the two different types of bias by saying, oh, no, they're reporting the news with a biased slant. And I'm like, no, most of the time, the news is pretty straightforward news. So getting to my point, the Tampa Bay Times, my local newspaper.
You've done the same thing. You've cherry picked one story that's not even remotely political and said, look, there's no bias. That proves my point. That's not political. Everybody's going to be mad that a little girl was shot in a drive-by. There's nothing political to report there.
Ryan, if I can restate what I think you're trying to say, is that the three news stories you showed to us was essentially the same story.
Yes, it's the same
Fox
story.
was like, oh, those Democrats are idiots, and MSNBC was like, oh, those Republicans are idiots. But it was essentially the same story. And
it's
yes,
the exact
they did
same
put a bias
story
on it, but the general facts were there.
Right. And ABC basically was reporting the facts. I get that the two of you saw some bias because you're like, oh, you could be critical about this too. And I cut the clip. I didn't want it to be a 5-minute clip, but it was a 5-minute story that they did on it where they talked about some of the other nuance. I think you're missing my point, right? When the Tampa Bay Times is reporting the news, it's pretty much straight reporting of the news. They also have an opinion section where they have columns by writers who are allowed to express their biases. They publish letters to the editor. I've submitted many, and some of them have gotten published. And they also publish editorials that reflect the views of the newspaper editors and staff. All of that is in the opinion section because that's where it's allowed to be, and it's explicitly
what's
biased.
Your point?
So,
I'm getting to my point. Just like I'm trying to lay out where I think there's a difference. This is why it bothers me so much when people make blanket statements like the mainstream media all have a liberal bias or all media is biased. The reality is that mainstream media and all media is run by people, all of whom have opinions. But in their news coverage, the mainstream media exhibits little, if any, bias in just reporting the news, other than the one that I talked about earlier, the bias in selecting what is newsworthy. The explicit bias is in the editorials and opinions where they admit their biases.
Right. Okay. If I can,
which gets to my question. If you want to summarize it again, that's fine.
Let me summarize it. Well, let me give an example. I think what Ryan's trying to say is if all the news channels got together and every night they hand selected all the same stories they were going to report on, that those stories would be delivered and like kind of like the examples we just saw, they would have a spin to it. But otherwise, the general facts would be the same. And that, I think that's the point you're trying to make, right?
You're very close. I would say the mainstream media would be really close to center and the most objective of the bunch. And then we have clear examples of the left and the right who would kind of report the facts, but with commentary. The mainstream media, in their news reporting, not their editorials, not their opinion pieces, because they do that too, in their news reporting, are as close to objective as you can get. And there are objective measures that establish this, which we'll get to with my third point. They're really close. And it bothers me because part of the reason why it bothers me, when I'm citing stuff, when I'm writing my research, I periodically do cite newspapers for like, this thing happened. Okay. When people say, oh no, the media is all biased, what they're basically saying is we can't trust anything. And I find that absurd, right? Like newspapers are places where they tell us things happened. Can we just agree that sometimes we have to go, oh, something frickin' happened, and they're telling us that it frickin' happened. And that's all. That's all they're doing. Happen. And it did frickin' happen, right? Like that, it drives me bonkers because it's like, oh, we can't trust anything. Okay, well then nothing happened. I have no idea what you're talking about because we can't trust anybody. It drives me nuts. Can we agree that the mainstream media exhibits minimal explicit bias in news reporting, even if there's a slight left-leaning bias in the columns, opinions, and editorials? So I'm admitting there's a slight left-leaning bias for mainstream media when you ask them their opinions. But in the news reporting, it's fine.
No.
Josh?
And I think part of the disconnect is because you're liberal, you don't see, we already pointed out, you showed a video that you said this is completely unbiased. And because you're liberal, you don't see the bias inherent in that reporting. Where again, a lot of it is the cherry picking of what to report. And I see what you're saying. And what we all want, left and right, we want what you're describing. We want the mainstream media to just be down the line, Walter Cronkite, and that's the way it was. We just want objective reporting. We want to know the facts. That's what I want to know. But that's not necessarily true. What you just said about the newspapers, this is what frickin' happened. Again, that's not always true. I was reading about or listening to a podcast today about a guy back in the 70s, I think it was. I can't remember his name. The media gave him a Pulitzer Prize because he did this big story. I guess it was before the 70s about Russia when Putin, or not Putin, the guy during World War II, the Russian
Stalin?
guy. Stalin was starving the Ukrainians to death, and he wrote this story saying Russians are hungry, but they're not starving. Okay, and it was bullcrap. Millions of Russians and Ukrainians were dying. Okay, he made the whole thing up, and they gave him a Pulitzer. And there's another lady that wrote a story about some kid that was drug-addled and addicted. She made the whole thing up and won a Pulitzer Prize. So
aren't you cherry picking now, Josh?
Yeah,
right.
So that's what I'm saying. For you to make
You're straight up cherry picking.
For you to make the blanket statement that
okay,
if it's in a newspaper, it happened. Well,
can we go with like 95% of the time what is reported in newspapers actually happens? And yeah, there are going to be some bad apples.
That's And again,
so you had to pick these like really obscure examples of like, no, there's this one.
You haven't been giving me any empirical data this whole time.
All I've given you is empirical. We're literally reading a newspaper and watching news stories.
You're cherry picking. You've cherry picked two stories and said
this is not cherry picking. Look, this is literally me just like, what's the story of the day? Let me find 3 news outlets. I didn't try and select anything special. Okay, and then the one that I grabbed today, you admitted there was no bias in it. It was just a girl got shot and they arrested the people.
No agreement. No agreement for
I'm
your
not going to get
Ryan,
agreement.
but you got agreement on your follow-up question. Good job. Okay, Ryan, third question, would you agree that a good indicator of probable media bias would likely be the political affiliations of the reporters themselves?
Okay, I want you to answer that question before I talk about it. We've agreed everybody's biased to one degree or another. That would be a good indicator if somebody's going to be biased is based on their political affiliation, right?
Such a broad statement.
It's a generalization. There are reporters out there that lean one way or another, and they're fairly objective, and those are the ones that we like. Like I like Jake Tapper. I think he's pretty liberal, but I think he's pretty fair. Okay, but answer the question: if somebody's going to be biased, that's probably how they're going to be biased, is based on their political affiliation, right?
Right. Like, I think George Stephanopoulos worked for the Clinton administration, and but I think for the most part, I don't think he's terribly biased from what I've seen.
Yeah, some are pretty
good. Something like that.
But some of them are terribly biased. So answer the question, right? I just want your opinion. If somebody's going to be biased, that's a good way to figure out how they'd be biased, right? That's fair.
I so want to just like cherry pick and throw this back in your face because this is what you've been doing to me all night long. Are you going to say that Joe Manchin is biased? Come on, Joe. Which way is Joe Manchin going? We saw the Fox News clip. He sounds like a Republican.
They love him.
They want him in the Republican Party. Fine, Josh. Sure. Yeah. Let's concede. And I won't cherry pick for you because I'm trying to be nice here tonight. But
there's nothing to cherry pick here.
What's your point?
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Come on.
Here's my point.
Okay. Ryan agrees. There's probably some bias.
Well, you said that from the beginning.
Right.
Okay. I'm going to read you some more statistics, and these are from some like a Harvard study, a couple different studies. Survey research has shown that an almost overwhelming fraction of journalists are liberal. For instance, reports that only 7% of all Washington correspondents voted for George Bush in '92. Compared to 37% of Americans. Okay. Let's see. Times reported that only 8% of Washington correspondents thought George Bush would be a better president than John Kerry. This compares to 50% of all American voters. David Brooke notes that for every journalist who contributed to George Bush's campaign, another 93 contributed to Kerry's campaign. Wow. These statistics suggest that Washington correspondents as a group are more liberal than almost any congressional district in the country. Okay, from a Texas A&M study, what they found surprised them. Even the supposedly hard-nosed financial reporters, so these are just financial reporters, were overwhelmingly liberal. Of the 462 reporters surveyed, 17.63 called themselves very liberal, while 40.84 describes themselves as somewhat liberal.
So I
can keep going.
Everyone, I think, could agree that Washington D.C. is liberal. It is always voted liberal, right? And so, but you're saying that the constituents that are there that are reporting
just the reporters. No, he just is talking about reporters.
Well,
just
yeah,
reporters.
But reporters. All I'm saying is, but you're saying that gets reflected in their reporting back on political news, which then affects the overall station and networks reporting.
When you have about 90% of the people working for these news stations, and I keep going, that's about where the break is in every one of these studies. Let's see. Well, do you want me to keep going? That's where all these go. Okay.
No, okay.
90% of the reporters, the correspondents, the news anchors, 90% of these people are liberal. And you expect me to believe that the reporting's going to be 50-50? It's going to be unbiased? It's going to be right down the middle? I know you want to believe in this utopia system where all of these guys are objective and just reporting the facts, but it's not happening because they're cherry picking what to report. Yeah, I'll concede that when they're reporting something that's not political, they're usually pretty good about it. But when they're reporting something political, it's incredibly biased. And all of these guys,
Ryan's already answered the question. Now you're just banging him over the head.
Yes, because he refuses to see the reality of the situation. 90% of the news establishment is very liberal.
It's not very liberal. You're running counter to your own statistics. They said slightly liberal. That was literally what you just said. Okay. It was like 17% said very liberal and 40% said something like that.
I would say Fox is really the only mainstream outlet on the right. Everything else skews to the left. And I have more statistics. Again, like I said at the beginning, it's hard to quantify this, but these professors did a study where they actually quantified it, and they found, I won't go through every media outlet, but they found that's basically what it is. Most of these guys are slanted to the left.
Okay.
Or very to the left.
Ryan's third question to Josh. Josh, can we agree that bias is relative, which means we need some sort of objective criteria for determining whether a media outlet is actually biased and not just the opinions of people who are assuredly biased?
So Josh has already mentioned this, and this is, I don't think it's going to be a shocker here. You're both aware of the phenomenon of confirmation bias. Mm-hmm. It, of course, is the tendency to search for, favor, and have preferential recall for information that confirms one's pre-existing views. We all do this, and importantly, bias is right in the name. We are all biased, all of us. My point here, however, is that bias is always relative. If you are left-leaning and read an article on Breitbart that is to the right of you, you will consider it biased. If you are right-leaning and read an article on Mother Jones that is to the left of you, you will consider it biased. Bias is always relative to the beholder. What does this mean? If you're right of center and are watching or reading mainstream media, which is pretty damn close to center, they are going to seem left to you. But that's because you're right of center. As a result, you will claim that the mainstream media has a left-leaning bias, even though you are the person who is exhibiting the bias. Left of someone who is right-leaning doesn't automatically make something left of center. It just makes it left of you. And if you are really far to the right, then left of you could actually still be right-leaning. So my point, can we agree that bias is relative, which means we need some sort of objective criteria, not just people's opinions, for determining whether a media outlet is actually biased.
Did you really have to make this point? Because I already made this point.
But are you not looking in the mirror here?
Yeah, okay. I agree. I already made the point.
Well,
and the way you phrase that is
but
really
if
good.
you're right,
if you're right to the center, it's going to appear biased. I get it. That's a good point. Still wrong, but it's a good point. But I already made that point. I agree.
I'm trying to understand exactly what you're asking, because you're saying bias is inherent, and that
sure, we're all biased.
And
yes.
As observers, we're going to see it in the light we see it. So anything that's not in our sort of echo chamber is going to seem biased.
Yes.
And that's why and so you're saying the perceived bias that the mainstream media is liberal is exaggerated. It's mainly observed by those that are conservative, because just because
absolutely
doesn't agree with them.
Yeah, because okay, and I actually had this right at the beginning. Josh and I have had this conversation before, but I was gonna continue down. Like we established what we think are the mainstream media. We established the right and the left. Can we agree on any mainstream media outlets that we would agree are actually in the middle? Like the Wall Street Journal, Reuters, Associated Press, Newsweek, BBC News, NPR, because I actually did look at it's a website called allsides.com, where they tried to come up with objective criteria, and they put those 6 media outlets right in the middle.
See, right in the middle. I looked at one that did a study, and well, I don't remember all the ones. I think Reuters might have been in the middle. All the rest of them were slightly to the left, is what I saw.
Wall Street Journal, Reuters, AP, Newsweek, BBC News, and NPR, right in the middle. And yet we're still saying they have a left-leaning bias, blah, 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 blah.
Well, let me throw your own argument back at you.
Can any media outlet actually be objective?
Do you agree, Josh?
Well, let me just throw that back at Ryan, because he makes a good argument there. And I like how he phrased it. I really do. If you're to the right, then you're going to see the mainstream as being to
biased.
The left. I get that. But if you let's look at the actual situation. You're to the left, and you're saying that all the mainstream stuff is right down the middle.
Yeah,
that's a pretty good indicator that it's actually to the left.
Not necessarily, because there's stuff to the left of me, and I don't always agree with the stuff.
So
in the
you're the perfectly
media.
Objective judge. That's what you're saying.
No,
that's what you just tried to say.
I'm trying to be objective. I know I'm not. But I'm actually looking at people. They're not my metrics. I didn't create them, but these are metrics out there that exist that say
similar metrics.
These 6 outlets are right in the center. It's hard to argue that they're not in the center. And you already said, well, NPR, BBC News, they're to the left of the center. But you're also saying they're really close to the center, but I'm gonna push them to the left, right?
I didn't say
Why can't we just? You did. You're like they're slightly left of center. That's exactly.
That wasn't me. No, I can give you the study. I'll link it.
So, are you agreeing that they're actually in the center?
I don't watch any of them. I don't know.
So, do you agree with his point that they're not actually biased, but that it's just mainly that it's our observation of the world that makes us feel like it's biased?
Not if that's his point. I'll agree with the point that he made, and I've said it for 3 times because I really like his argument. If it's to the left, or if it's center and you're to the right, it's going to look to the left. but Ryan refused, and I'm looking at myself through that prism. Ryan refused to do the same thing because I made a very good point, and he went, "No, I'm more objective than that." So I'll give you half agreement. I'm not sure what the actual question was. You
Okay. A ding buzz. All right. Okay. That's really interesting, and that's a really interesting point, and that makes me actually think, because I've tried to be as down the line. I will not even like YouTube videos because I want YouTube to give me unbiased stuff, right? I don't want to get, I know. And it's funny. It's funny because I will do research on stuff. Like I do these political channels, right? And I'll do research and I'll go like hardcore into like a very liberal one, a very conservative. And I know YouTube's like, well, what should I give him next? He's throwing me off. Right. And I don't want to be. And so I try to be very deliberate in my media sources of trying to get things that are trying to not to get it completely unbiased, and reading stuff that I find ridiculous but I'll read it because it helps me understand the other point of view.
Okay. Isn't that interesting though, that nobody can really agree that there's one news source that's unbiased? Isn't that interesting?
I'm trying to insist that there are.
Well,
that's what I'm
but I don't think they are.
What
I don't think they are, and most people are not going to agree with you that they are. Certainly not NPR.
I find it very interesting.
They're very leftist.
I have to Ryan's point. I have read articles, and this is what I think is interesting, that people on the left will accuse the media of not being fair to them.
Mm-hmm.
And like Hillary Clinton's campaign will say like, oh, the media was really rough on me about this and this, and they were giving Trump a free pass here. And from a conservative standpoint, you'd be like, what? You're getting a free pass? You never get a free pass, right? But you're like, that's interesting. But the fact that they would be disagreeing with and mad at the media would suggest that the media is more objective than we think it is. Now, I don't think they complain about it as much as the right does. So it's hard to say, but that's interesting. So that's interesting. You said that, Ryan. That makes me think. That's a very interesting point.
It was a good point. It was a very good point.
All right. Ryan has a fourth question.
What is this? I thought we had rules.
Bonus. Yeah.
We need to have a real point system, and you need to dock him for this.
I'll allow it, 'cause
this is his fifth point.
It really is. All right.
So show me the cherry-picked news story he's used for this point.
Can we agree, Josh? On some issues, the mainstream media does, in fact, exhibit substantial bias. Okay. Where's
suddenly
gotcha?
Josh is like, oh, I like this point. Go with 0.5 or 6 or 7 because I like it. Let's good.
Let's edit this video and just use this one.
Yeah.
So thank you, Tom, for granting this. I do want to make a fourth point today, or fifth, or whatever it is, even though I know I've already been long-winded. COVID-19 did illustrate to me that there are some biases among mainstream media outlets. From the very beginning of the pandemic, there were varied perspectives among scientists on what the best response might be. The mainstream media quickly chose the response of lockdown, mask, and hide. They were also very critical of Sweden's approach, which was lockdown and hide the vulnerable, then let everyone else get on with their lives. Anyone who questioned the mainstream view was marginalized, and I saw it. Since I agreed with a minority view on this point, I saw just how biased the mainstream media was on COVID-19. And they willed enormous power. And in this case, I think they abused it and possibly are continuing to abuse it. This does make me wary about media bias in general, not just media bias among the mainstream. So my fourth point, or fifth, or whatever we're on, is basically me undermining some of my earlier points, but I'm trying to be honest here. And Josh, can we agree that on some issues, the mainstream media does in fact exhibit substantial bias? And I'll give two issues where I think they really screwed things up. COVID-19 and the run up to the war in Iraq. They also did this in Vietnam, but that's before our time. I don't think they do this all the time, but sometimes they get things very, very wrong.
Yeah, kudos to you for being objective. Yeah.
Ding, ding.
The interesting thing you just pointed out is when you disagreed with the media, then you saw the bias. So, that's worth thinking about. Okay. Maybe I'm just disagreeable. Maybe that's why I see so much bias in the media. And let me be clear to everybody, I definitely see the bias with Fox News. I don't listen to Fox News because I know they're super biased. So that's worth thinking about what you just said. When you don't agree with what the media is saying, that's when you start to see the bias. And since the media, I believe, is slanted to the left, I believe that's why most people on the left don't see the bias or are okay with it. So I 100% agree with your point. The media does get some things very wrong, but I think there's more bias, obviously, than you do. Agreement. This
is all right. Let me give you a couple thoughts and then your final statement. So it's interesting, Ryan, you were talking about COVID-19 and when it came, this is a previous podcast, you were talking about when it first came out, it was a little bit of hysteria, right? And then you said you kind of researched the facts and then you're like, okay, I'm not as worried about this as you initially were. I had the exact same experience as you. And people were like, oh, COVID-19. And I'm like, well, if what I'm reading is correct, this actually shouldn't be dangerous for me. And I wasn't very concerned about it, but I do agree. You kind of had to read between the lines sometimes of the media. Like the facts were there, but sometimes they were a little hidden between a little bit of hysteria, hype, and other hyperbole. And so this is what I was talking about earlier, is like, I'm very deliberate about trying to get unbiased news, but I think it's hard work. And what it sometimes actually happens is I don't have any problem listening to Fox News. I will listen to Fox News, but you very much know you're listening to Fox News. And then I'll turn around and I'll listen to MSNBC. I'll listen to Rachel Maddow and I'll be like, but I know exactly. And it's interesting because you can actually pick up good points from both sides and you can get a more well-rounded picture because it's kind of funny what you were saying about I actually agree with Josh that the second point of bias in determining what stories you actually choose to pick on is probably more dangerous and more shows more bias. But and so it's interesting that you kind of have to that's why you have to listen to both sides, because the side that's in favor, it might omit things, but the side that is against it is definitely not going to admit anything, right? They're going to tell you all the crappy stuff. And so that, like when I'm researching a review on Amazon, I want to see the 1-star reviews, right? Because they'll tell you all the stuff about that product that you didn't know. You're like, oh, right. I didn't realize that. And Smart. That's why it's good to listen to the opposite side, right? Because they'll tell you things that you're like, oh, I didn't even realize. So I think the problem is I don't think most Americans are very deliberate in their news. They just listen to something they like and agrees with them a lot. And therefore they get, I feel like they get brainwashed, but so I think that's the problem. But let's go with everyone's closing arguments. Ryan, give us your thoughts.
Yeah. So I've tried tonight, right, to make the point that, and this is really like my big point. If there are media outlets that are to the left, and if there are media outlets that are to the right, and we can all agree that those do exist, then there must necessarily be some media outlets that are closer to the center. And I don't know that we've fully agreed that that's the case, but that's my perspective on this. Okay. Is if there's left and there's right, there's got to be something closer to the center. And unlike Tom, like I cannot stomach, and I'll be completely honest here, I can't stomach Fox News. Like I can't, but I also can't stomach Rachel Maddow and left-leaning news. I can't stomach either of them because I know what I'm getting is spin rather than good information. Right. So I don't watch either of those. I have tried to narrow in on stuff that I think is close to the middle. And that means that most of my news actually comes from BBC News. I've talked about this before on here. I read my local mainstream paper, right? Tampa Bay Times. I don't read most of their editorials. Sometimes I will. They are left of center and they admit that. They're open about the fact that they are left of center in their editorials. But for just their regular news coverage, it's pretty benign. And I get that maybe that's my biases coming out, and that's fine. But BBC News comes out pretty clean as being pretty close to the center. And that's what I stick with because I don't want all the opinion. I just want facts. So that's what I try and do. I don't think the mainstream media is as biased as a lot of people think. I think it's a reliable source of generally accurate information. Sometimes they get things wrong. Are they biased in their editorials? Yeah, a little bit to the left, but a little bit to the left is way better than far to the right or far to the left, in my opinion.
To be clear, I don't just listen to Fox News and
Thank you.
I'm but I can't. I'm saying I can.
I can't stomach them. Good. I can't stomach them.
And I will at times in pursuit of the truth. Right.
Sure.
All right, Josh, go ahead.
I just had this mental image of Tom as a crackhead, just watching Fox News and MSNBC. Yeah.
Oh, God.
Good stuff. Well, and to Ryan's point, because it's so much opinion that a lot of times, like, there's a few facts in there, but it's like 75% of like just spinning and opinion, right?
It's funny Ryan said that, because I'm exactly the same way. I can't watch like Tucker Carlson and I can't watch Rachel Maddow, because it's just a couple of blowhards that get drunk on the smell of their own farts, that think they're right, and they're so certain about everything, and they're not objective at all. It's all about page clicks. It's all about money. They're just catering to their audience. They're just so stuck in their own echo chamber. It's insufferable. So on that issue, Ryan and I agree 100%. I hate how partisan that aspect of it has become. Where we are going to continue to disagree is, with my statistic there, if 90% of the news structure is liberal, we're going to have a 90 to 10 split. And I'll agree with Ryan. Some of these agencies are closer to the middle and more reputable. I'll give you BBC. I'm not going to give you NPR. And that's good. And I think what we all want is just the facts. That's what we would all be happy with. I just don't see how we're going to get there, because we're getting more and more polarized. And this is why we're doing the podcast, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to show people that it's possible to talk to people you disagree with. We're trying to show people that it's good to listen to dissenting viewpoints to get the facts that the other side has, because we're all ignorant. Listen to other people, talk to people that you disagree with, get out of your echo chamber. That's important. Because if we don't, the way the country is diverging and how the numbers continue to escalate, we're heading towards civil war. One side of the country is only getting their news from over here, and the other side is getting completely different news. If we're not on the same page on even what the news is, that's a recipe for disaster. So I like some of Ryan's points, but I think 90-10, man, you can't argue with those numbers. It is.
I can't argue with him. I'm choosing not to.
All right.
But I will just
you.
end with Josh did call MSNBC and Fox News whores, which I think is great.
They are. I can't really stomach either, because it's like Tom said, what you're getting with both of them. What's the point?
but I think that the scariest part is so many people don't know what they're getting with them.
Right.
And when you say things like, I think most of us just want the facts, I don't think that's true. Otherwise, why would people be watching these?
Yeah,
right? They're clearly watching them to get affirmation for what they already believe.
Josh, when you said everyone would just be happy if we just had just the facts. I'm
okay,
like, I don't know.
Rephrase that.
I don't know if that's true.
You're both right. Everybody would be better off, but they'd be less happy.
I will agree with,
because they would their viewpoint would be challenged, and then they'd have to work for it, and people wouldn't be happy being ignorant in their happy little bubble. So thank you for the correction. You're both right there. But boy, would it be nice if we just had one news source that was completely objective that we could trust.
All right. That was a good episode. Appreciate our debaters and the facts they brought in and the opinions. There was some good points were brought up, and Josh was not agreeing tonight. He was not going along with Ryan's ride. But it was good. That was a good one tonight. So hope you stay tuned. Subscribe if you haven't already subscribed for our next one, and we'll see you on our next podcast. Thanks.
Josh, we may not always agree when it comes to politics, even though we're trying, but there is one thing we agree on. There is only one way to clean up after going to the bathroom, And that's with a Lux bidet.
I've been a proud owner of a Lux bidet for years. I have literally owned a Lux Neo 320 since 2013. That's the warm water model. Talk about happy, fun, poopy time. When I leave the bathroom, I know I'm clean and ready to talk politics in a civilized manner.
Exactly. Using a toilet without a bidet is about as uncivilized as it gets. Civil conversations demand civil hygiene practices.
And that is why our listeners should get themselves a Lux bidet.
And just to be clear, Lux is not supporting one side or the other in this podcast. They support civil conversations and clean butts.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Finding Common Battlegrounds. The music is by Ben Sound. The views expressed in this podcast are those of the participants and not those of their employers. For more information or more episodes, you can find us at findingcommonbattlegrounds.com.